Welcome to Headliners Forum. We're here to bring you the best in Texas journalism, the stories behind the great stories. I'm Mark Morrison. Our special guests are John Tedesco and Robert Downen, reporters at the Houston Chronicle. They and their colleagues at the Chronicle and the San Antonio Express News won the Showcase Gold Award for Enterprise and Innovation, the highest honor bestowed in our annual competition. Their series, Abuse of Faith, also won a Headliners Green Award and separate contests that was in partnership with the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors, honoring the state's investigative report of the year. John and Robert, thank you for joining us and congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Rob, your series revealed a long pattern of alleged sexual abuse by hundreds of workers and volunteers at a number of the Southern Baptist churches. How did you become interested in this project and how did you get it launched?
So it happened, in pretty much the most organic way it could have happened. I was working as a first fellow on the GA beats at the Houston Chronicle. I'd only been there about 6 months. And there had been this lawsuits filed against a Texas Court of Appeals judge alleging, decades of sexual abuse on his part. And when the lawsuit first kind of came out, I think there were some people that were apprehensive of the claims, one, because they were outside of the statute of limitations. So, there was some reporting on the lawsuit itself, and then it kind of just moved its way through the federal court system. And one night I was sitting on Pacer and saw that there had been an update in it and came across this $500,000 settlement from 2004 between this guy and another youth group member. And so that kind of, the crux of the lawsuit wasn't just that he had abused people, but that it had been concealed by high-ranking SBC officials. And so that settlement that I found kind of gave some weight to at least one of the claims in the lawsuit. And so then the next question was, well, how much weight are there to the rest of the claims? And that kind of just started the whole process, though.
Right. John, this project quickly gained a lot of traction in the newsroom. Tell us a little bit about the commitment that the two news organizations made to this investigation.
Yeah, it was a huge investment of time and resources. After Rob started digging into this problem of sexual abuse in the SBC, like the question came up, how often does this happen? And so we had a team that grew to 4 reporters. We had 3 photojournalists. We had 2 data journalists, editors at 2 separate newspapers, page and graphic designers all working on this. It took us about 6 months of reporting and writing for the first installment. And then after first 3 parts of the series ran, we spent like close to a year working on follow-up stories and new angles.
You found a number of cases that one of the challenges was to figure out, well, just what is the scope of this? And Rob, help us understand how you did that. I know you created a massive database with a lot of, on-the-ground research. And how did the team go about that?
Well, so as far as the scope goes, I think there's a really important distinction between the SBC and, the Roman Catholic Church. The SBC, they don't have any sort of, I guess, official way. They don't track ordinations. They don't track, really anything. It's kind of this collective of churches. And so, whereas the Roman Catholic Church sex abuse scandal had, there was documentation that was on file that did identify many predators. We were kind of working, basically, just trying to hunt down any single case that we could find, and that became the kind of framework for our database that we put together, which was I'm sure John would agree with me, it was as probably the most difficult part of the entire reporting process. just because there's so much room for errors. You know, you have cases that are changing, you know, people getting deferred adjudication or pleading out, stuff like that. And so as far as how the database came together, so the reason we did that is in 2008, the SBC had been brought a bunch of recommendations by sexual abuse survivors, really this group that had been kind of calling these things for a while. And one of them was this idea of a database of people who have been accused of things, so that people could reference it. And so our reasoning for doing that is, one, we just wanted to show our work as much as we possibly could, but two, kind of, you know, show if this database existed, how could it be used? How could it be a benefit to SBC? So.
Right. So, and I think there are something like 47,000 churches that are part of that confederation, and
The second largest faith group in the nation.
And like 16 million members, they estimate, something. I see numbers all over the board on that, but it's a lot.
And the fact that the number fluctuates anywhere between like 14 and 16 million kind of speaks to what we were talking about this lack of record keeping that makes, you know, sexual abuse allegations so hard to track too. So.
Right. Yet, and you know, it's a huge, these are huge numbers. And, you know, what you found were several hundred cases. But the problem is that these were very serious cases of sexual abuse and involving young women, mostly teenagers. And as you alluded to, the church, the Central Church, had been alerted to these problems and didn't seem to have taken much action to confront the issue. John, you reported on a number of individuals who had been victims of alleged abuse. What were some of the worst outcomes?
Well, this is something that stays with people forever. I mean, this is a trauma that you know, sometimes occurs when these people are children, and it stays with them for years. And it's very difficult to speak out about it or to tell anyone what happened. The perpetrator was somebody they trusted. And it's, I mean, we all had long, difficult conversations with people talking about these episodes and, you know, how they dealt with it. And, you know, people consider suicide. There's a lot of pain that they're going through. I talked to a guy who spoke out and reported what happened to him to police, and it was good that he felt good for doing that, but it caused a backlash in his family because he had relatives who were close to the pastor who had abused this young man, and they believed the pastor over him. And so, you know, he's traumatized all over again. So it's a really hard issue.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on that real quick. Yeah, I mean, in talking to, the things that stand out to me the most are kind of like what John was saying, which is, you know, that it wasn't, the physical abuse was itself horrific, but the worst, most earth-shattering part of it was when, you know, I went to trust someone I was supposed to trust who told me they were my shepherd, and they didn't believe me. And as far as the long-term implications of that trauma, it's really, it's those are where we often saw the most severe consequences, when people were just disbelieved.
Right. I know your pieces had big impact, but when you first started asking questions about this and developing your data, what kind of reaction did you get from the Southern Baptist Convention leadership? I know they took some issue with some of your findings.
So I think that, about a year prior to our reporting, there had been a pretty big scandal involving Paige Patterson, who's really the most monumental Southern Baptist of the last half century, involving his handling of students' rape claims. And so by the time we had started approaching SBC leaders, there had been this conversation ongoing within the denomination about sex abuse. Obviously, it wasn't where it should have been, but, you know, I think I often ask myself, what would have been the effect of our story if we had published it in February of 2018 versus 2019. And I think there was a growing recognition that they need to recognize the problem within the SBC because of the Paige Patterson stuff. And so leaders, I would generally say their reaction was one of shock, I guess just kind of horror, but I never felt that I didn't feel that they were ever calling into question our reporting. In fact, a lot of them are actually very complimentary of it. Now, the person who did call into question our reporting was Paige Patterson, who was the person I mentioned at the outset of this comment. So, but besides that, church leaders from the local level to the denominational level, I mean, they have been largely, I guess, I don't want to say thankful, but I guess that is the best word to do it. But
we were thanked. We were thanked from many, all sides. I mean, local church leaders, certain SBC leaders they flat out did thank us for bringing this to light, and they urged Southern Baptists to take it seriously. So,
yeah, talk a little bit, John, about some of the measures of reform that you have seen on behalf of the SBC.
Yeah, I mean, the series really changed the entire conversation of the SBCs. They have a huge annual meeting every year, and that year was in Birmingham. And Rob and I and John Shapley, the photojournalist who worked on this project, went there, and there were a lot of panels discussing how to tackle this problem. I think probably maybe the biggest reform that they pushed was a new process where somebody could raise a concern about a church and an inquiry would be made, and potentially that church could no longer be part of the SBC, depending on how they handle sexual abuse claims. There's some debate. I think a lot of critics they're asking whether that's going to be enough or if the SBC will just go back to the status quo.
Yeah, but at least they show signs of taking this issue somewhat more seriously and becoming more active in response to it. Bob, what is your view of that? Or Rob, what is your view of that? And on the local levels, what's changed in some of these churches?
So I think one of the biggest hurdles for us as journalists was, this is not a neat story where there's someone at the top who issued a decree or said, this is how we will deal with this thing. It was, a large swath of people who, understood that sexual abuse was a thing that could happen in the church, but didn't understand the extent to which it was happening within their own denomination. And at the same time, so again, going back to the SBC's structure, their presidents, that sounds like a very, very powerful position, but actually it's in many ways kind of just a figurehead position. This is a denomination that for which the idea of local church autonomy, the idea that no one can dictate the affairs of your church, that's sacrosanct. I mean, it is a bedrock of their doctrine. And so as reporters, that's made it a lot more difficult for us to, one, write the initial stories, but also when we talk about change within the SBC, it makes it a lot more difficult because there's we're talking about 47,000 churches and spread across the country. What I will say though is the things that I found the most encouraging, from just hearing what people of prominence have said, is the acknowledgement that the steps that they have taken, while they are first steps, they are still first steps. Good steps, they are still first steps, and that to actually confront this issue isn't something that's going to be able to be done in a policy standpoint as much as a very real and inward-looking examination of the culture that allowed it to flourish for so long. So.
Right. And John, this is an issue that not only confronts the Southern Baptists, but a lot of religious organizations and, of course, organizations in general. So talk a little bit about how you try to keep this issue in front of readers, and maybe Rob can chip in after you speak.
Yeah, Rob actually wrote a story about how other denominations were watching the SBC to see how they were handling this. You know, when the first 3 parts of the series were published, I mean, the response was incredible. I had never witnessed anything like it. It went viral. We got hundreds of tips from readers. They contacted us online, and many of them told us their own stories of abuse, sometimes for the first time. And we also got lots of tips. And you know, those tips helped lead us to another 3 parts of the series that were published that summer. So that was really helpful. It helped us stay on the story. You know, and we continued to follow the story as the SBC was debating different reforms and ways to tackle this. And, you know, ultimately, I mean, this kind of changed Rob's career. He's now covering religion for the Chronicle now. So he's still staying on top of this.
Yeah, I mean, it has definitely been difficult. I guess, you know, even after the first 3 stories we wrote, you know, we talked a lot as a team about, you know, we could write stories about figures who did XYZ thing, but is that really serving, you know, to what degree is it more useful to continue exposing what specific people did, or dig into what I guess you could call, you know, I would call it a collective failure amongst, you know, 47,000 churches, 15 million people to take this seriously. And so that was already a really challenging thing to report on, is that balance between, you know, writing about a system versus writing about individuals. But now that COVID's happened, it kind of, for the last 6 months or so, has felt almost like, I don't want to say a standstill, but I think there are a lot of people that are concerned that coming out of COVID, any momentum that they had may have been lost when it comes to abuse reforms. So that is obviously something we will be keeping an eye on.
Your database on the SBC, folks involved and so forth, is kept up to date with new cases and so forth, so that it's really a great service to the organization.
Yeah, and we could have, I think John and I could have been working for the rest of our careers just maintaining that database. I mean, even going through all of the initial reader tips and people who reached out to us in the first few weeks after that was a year plus of work. And so it is, as a reporter, sometimes it does feel a little bit daunting to think about, like, you know, our handful of stories yielded, I can't remember, but hundreds of people coming forward with their own stories. And so to think about that, you know, amplified I guess multiplied out, it really is, I guess, speaks to the problem. So
yeah, I'm sure, like most cases where people are reporting sexual abuse, the tendency is that these numbers get underreported. So you've captured a good sample, but it maybe portends bigger problems than what the numbers themselves suggest.
Yeah, and so one, we were as conservative as we possibly could be with our numbers. For instance, like our 700 victims number that we found, if we were looking through a police report and, you know, it said XYZ person had 3 or got multiple victims at, you know, ABC church, for our purposes that counted as 2 because we couldn't differentiate it. And if you know how sexual predators work, that's not how they work. But the other big challenge too was we rely a lot of most SBC churches are actually really small and in more rural parts of the country where media coverage has been, I guess we'll say, decimated over the last few decades. And so one of the big challenges for us as reporters was we had to, in many cases, rely on old local media reports to identify cases and then use those to find, to corroborate them. But as local media has died in these smaller parts of the country, the avenues for the abused to have their voices heard is disappearing. And so anytime I can in these conversations, I always like to plug to just support your local newspaper, because
well, your work is
none of it possible without their work. So
your work has been an inspiration to all of us who were part of the judging process. And I want to thank you, Robert Downen, and John Tedesco, and your entire team. And congratulations to you, as well as the Chronicle and Express News, for their commitment to important in-depth journalism.
well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. From this site, you can link to the entire Abuse of Faith series and to interviews with other award-winning Texas journalists. For the Headliners Foundation of Texas and forum producer Gary Pickle, I'm Mark Morrison.